Welcome everyone to our material handling lifting applications in shipyards for Ingersoll Rand. We welcome you today. We have Jim Cowan and Mark Koski here with me. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. I'm Sarah Middleton. I'm the marketing manager for material handling. And I just wanted to kind of give you guys a quick overview of our agenda today. So as I mentioned, Jim and Mark will be presenting to us today, and they're going to walk you through all the various applications and our products within material handling that will work within shipyards and shipbuilding. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have a question and answer session. And I want to make sure you guys know that throughout the time as your questions come up, you can utilize the Q&A function or the chat feature within Zoom. So if you have a question, you want to make sure you don't forget it, you're welcome to type it in at any given point. We'll see it, and then we'll address all questions after we've walked through the slide deck. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark and to Jim to introduce themselves.
Next slide.
Clicking.
Well, there we go.
There we go.
Well, good morning, afternoon, and evening to everybody. I'm Mark Koski. I'm the guy on the left, and that is pre-COVID, obviously. This is my COVID protest period is what I'm calling it. So I handle the material handling group for most of North America, and I share some responsibility with Mr. Cowan. So your turn, Jim.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So Jim Cowan here, I'm the guy in the middle, and I am the commercial leader for the Americas, located in Houston, Texas. And I've been with the company a little over 15 years. And just want to say welcome to everyone. Appreciate you showing up. Okay, just a quick overview of Ingersoll Rand at a glance. As you, I'm sure know, we're a global company, over 16,000 employees plus total, over 40 brands. The primary brands you recognize, obviously, Ingersoll Rand and Gardner Denver. We came together, merged with Gardner Denver early last year. We're comprised of 3 business units: compressed air technologies, the fluid handling business, and power tools and lifting, which is where we belong. Next slide. This is just a little history of the business unit as it stands now. It came together from so a couple acquisitions. First one being in 1987, BB Brothers. That was a company out of Seattle, Washington, that was founded in 1924. And Samia, which is a company in Douai, France, that we acquired in 1990. And Samia was founded way back in 1947. And in 2010, as you see, the facility in Seattle was moved out just outside of Seattle to Kent, Washington, to get some more space. Next slide. This is basically our global footprint. The 2 plants I mentioned, the Kent, Washington plant and Douai, France. Both plants have service centers as well, and then there's service centers in Shanghai, China, and Singapore. As well as distribution centers. Primary distribution centers are in Charlotte, North Carolina, and in Genk, Belgium, as well as in Shanghai and Singapore. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
All right, thank you, Jim. So we're going to narrow down and focus some of the lifting applications in shipyards. So how are hoists mainly used in and around the water and building and repairing ships? So next one, Miss Sarah. So biggest application is in the shipbuilding. So these are very heavy, bulky items such as the rudders, shafts, props, and propellers. And as you can imagine, most of the ships are built with major cranes overhead, but you can't get that crane, or you can't get that hook up underneath the hull. So a lot of the ships have welded pad eyes on them, and they're using those pad eyes to attach these chain hoists in order to assemble all these big, heavy, bulky attachments or pieces of equipment. Next one. So additional to shipbuilding, you have to pull and tension, get these things repaired. Again, you have to pull the props off, pulling rudders off, and most of the time those end up being damaged because of in the water, hitting or just regular use. So there's major corrosion. So that's where these chain hoists get used a lot. So using to repair the props for repairing or removing and installing azipods and some of the gearboxes. Next one. And as you're assembling these, that's where you see some of these overhead cranes. But in order to pull sometimes generators, engines, any kind of major piece of equipment through the hull, that's where these hoists get used. So again, in the modular sections, you have to assemble things not quite from overhead. So you have to pull these things from lateral positions, and that's where these hoists get used. Again, another major application. Next one. It's running a little slow. Again, when you get inside the ships, you've already built it, you've already done some of the major stuff, but inside, that's where a lot of the hydraulic winches get used, even electric hoists, pneumatic hoist and winches. Again, a lot of marine salt environment, steam, high humidity, high temperature. So again, a lot of just nasty environments where you have to be very cautious, and that's where we thrive. That's where people think of Ingersoll Rand and some of these applications. In addition to that is even some of the mooring systems for pulling the chain, anchors, and some of these dock lines and stuff where the heavy equipment gets used. Next one. And you have to also think, not only are you in the shipyard, some of this equipment needs to be repaired offshore. So that's that one picture, is when you have to take care of doing something while you're in the water. That's where a lot of people use the air hoist and hydraulic hoist. And now we have a subsea, which we'll touch on later. But this just gives you some of the photographs of how these things get used. That center one shows how multiple hoists, again, welded pad eyes on there to reattach a rudder. And the one on the right is a 100-ton Herculink series air hoist. That just gives you a frame of reference of how large these things are next to a person. And from there, I will turn it over to Mr. Jim.
Okay, so we're just going to dive in straight to hoist. We're not going to cover winches at all. I'll start with the power sources for our hoist. We have pneumatic, electric, hydraulic. We actually have manual hoists as well. We're not going to cover those. You'll notice in the red lettering, the lift chain and Herculink, you'll see that a few times going forward. Those are our main series of hoists. The lift chain are manufactured at the Douai, France facility, and the Herculinks are manufactured in our Kent, Washington facility. The lift chains not only are available in air, but they're also hydraulic. And the Herculinks, they don't have a hydraulic, but they have air and electric. So we kind of have all three covered. Next slide. So if you compare air, electric, hydraulic in terms of what's better, what's worse, it's like anything else. There's advantages, disadvantages to each. Kind of depends on really the application. If you kind of look at that chart, you kind of see that air is really the most suitable for areas where it's you're going to get a lot of abuse. You need some flexibility. Electric is more, it's more efficient, obviously, but it's not very prone for shock loading and things like that. Hazardous environments. You tend to get kind of expensive and with explosion proof type. And in hydraulic is kind of in between. So for shipyards, you're more, you get, it's definitely, you're going to see a prevalence of air hoists, less so on the electric and hydraulic. So we're going to focus on air for this discussion today. Next slide. Okay, so speaking of air, there's three different motor types available: our piston, gear type motor, and vane motors. Piston motors, they're kind of like basically a motor in your car. Instead of gas, it's air, but you've got a piston that strokes a crankshaft for rotation. positive side on the, they're really, really good for very high capacities and slow speeds. A lot of control for, high capacities and slow speeds. Downside is there's a lot of moving parts and they get quite expensive. The gear motor style, it covers by far the widest range from 1 ton up to 50 ton, sweet spot being 1 to 25 ton. Still gives you a lot of good control, a lot less moving parts, and consequently a lot less cost. So we tend to sell, probably 90% of those type into shipyards. And in vane type, I have those here. We're not going to talk about those today, primarily have them here. We do offer a smaller capacity line of air hoist, and they're also used in all of our air tools as well. So next slide. So what's the best solution? I kind of gave it away. You can go to the next slide. Kind of gave it away. It's the lift chain gear motor hoist produced in our French facility is by and large, the most popular for shipyards. And as I mentioned, it's also available in hydraulic. And as Mark said, there is a line developed specifically for underwater use. And he'll talk a little bit more about that with hydraulic. And then on the Herculink, you saw the picture of the big 100 tons. So they are used in shipyards, just, few and far between applications, but tend to be high capacity applications. And then of course, the electrics, if those are needed as well. Next slide. So looking at just the lift chain air gear motor, if you're not familiar with that type of motor, most people are familiar with the vane motors when it comes to air or piston. But the gear motor, the picture on the left is a great illustration of the internals. If you look at it, there's 2 rotors, and it's very simple. Air passes between the rotors, providing the rotation to the crankshaft or to the gearbox, and that's that's one of the horsepowers. We actually have we can double that horsepower essentially by just adding another stage of those same exact rotors, so same part number in between. So I think the next slide I'll show you a little bit on that. But what I love about the lift chain is, especially the 25 and under, they're so modular. The design is so modular, and there's such few parts, gives you a great deal of flexibility. So a lot less parts, a lot less maintenance, less to stock. We can cover, I think it's 10 different sizes from 1 to 25 ton. The 1 ton will give you, you can configure it to 2 ton by doubling the falls of chain, 1.5 to a 3 ton, as well as you can go to a 6 ton with 4 falls, and then our 4 ton, double it to 8 ton, on and on. I'm not going to keep going. And then we designate it with the S, D, T, and Q. Let's say you can just look at the model number and know how many falls it is. Go ahead, next slide, sir. Actually, you can go ahead and fast forward to the next 2. There you go. So this is really to drive home the fact I mentioned modularity in few parts. I mentioned there's basically just 2 horsepower motors, 3.5 and 5.5. And by adding, and you can see the picture there, it shows that extra stage added. So, the picture before was just 1 stage, and this is the 5.5 horsepower version. Which would cover, I think, about the second half, 4 to 8 ton and up to 25 ton. So just with 1 to 25 ton, just 2 motors. And you can go to the next slide. So the central body of the hoist is where the chain goes through. We cover all these sizes with just 5 parts, part numbers to order. And there's 3 chain sizes, 8 millimeter, 13, and 16. And next slide. So this is the gearbox, and there's only 3 gearboxes needed for 1 through 25 ton. And just one muffler fits them all, by the way. It's just screws on the end. So go ahead and next slide. And only 1 motor cover fits all the motors, or both motors, I should say. And then go ahead. And the pendant module, just 1 part for that, 1 part for the pendant. Next slide. And go ahead and go to the next slide. So the big takeaway here is just, if you need a pull chain module, those as well. And actually at shipyards, Mark, you agree, pull chains are probably, for for longer lifts, you start to see more and more of those.
Many.
Yep.
And
And
then
then,
shows is where you can just unbolt the pendant module and bolt on the pull chain module.
yep. So anyway, that's kind of shows you a nice breakdown cutaway of the hoist. The big takeaway is fewer parts, fewer costs, less maintenance. Go to the next slide. So beyond that, you know, some of the other features that I really like, they're all really catered more towards safety. Our overload protection device, this is standard in all of our CE models. It's offered as an option for our non-CE models. And what's, you know, obviously it protects the hoist, the hook, you know, all the load bearing components from, you know, the operator lifting too much weight more than the rated load. So it's a good feature. I always recommend it. But what's unique about ours is that there's no mechanical, you know, slip clutch. It's everything is pneumatic. You know, it'll sense the difference in the air pressure and it shuts the hoist off completely. So there's no friction, heat, so no wear and tear. Wait, next slide. And another really nice feature are the top and bottom limit switches. These are standard on all of the models, unlike, you know, most of our competitors. And these are integrated into the hoist body. You can see in the little red square boxes there on the two pictures, the upper and then the lower limit. What that allows is there's no paddle or arm out there to get bent or not get knocked off. And actually you can use the hoist horizontally to pull, and that the chain stopper will still come in contact with it and shut the hoist off. And just like the overload, it is pneumatic, it shuts the hoist off, it doesn't slip. So again, no mechanical wear and tear. Next slide. And it's just the load chain is all grade 80 load chain. It's zinc plated for obviously shipyards or, you know, either on the water, near water, usually salt water, corrosive environment. All built with a 5-to-1 design factor, and they're built in Europe, so meet all the European standards and codes. Next slide. We got a couple more. I mentioned the muffler earlier. It's just one muffler for all the 25-ton and down, just screws right onto the end of the gearbox. But I say it's a safety feature because this is a very quiet hoist, relatively. It's only 79 decibels. And I think it's last slide. I'll turn it over to Mark. This just shows a picture of the bottom block. You know, water collects on the chain, runs down to the bottom block, collects, just shows that it's a hole to drain the water. You also have a lubrication point, and again, 5-to-1 design factor as well, and a bearing for easy rotation. And that's it in a nutshell. There's a whole lot more, but for time's sake, I'll turn it over to Mark.
All right, thank you, Jim. So as you can see, we haven't just haphazardly built this. Every part of this hoist has been designed with the customer and a lot of shipyards in mind. So all the nuisance problems where a lot of competitive hoist out there have problems, the lift chain takes care of those problems and makes it much more easier. But just because it's a standard product doesn't mean we will not build engineered to order. We call them ETO. So if you want something custom, that's where Ingersoll Rand shines. We will build very customized, either individual components or completely new hoist. And in fact, that's how the Subsea originally started. But if you want an electric chain hoist that's explosion proof, ultra compact, we can do that. Customized mounted special end trucks for air, and even radio remote explosion proof control systems. Again, the answer is yes. Good, Ms. Sarah. So we alluded to this earlier. So the Subsea hydraulic hoist is a lift chain by its origin. So LC2H is the lift chain 2nd generation hydraulic, but we have modified that. It actually started out for the US Navy, and we sealed it. We made it all the internal passages. We eliminated all the you know, snag points on the outside of it. Everything on this has the diver in mind. The paddles on the pendant are extra wide to accommodate a diver's glove. All the control lines, all the main hydraulic supply and return lines, everything has quick connects, both top and bottom ends. So again, everything's been designed around the underwater use. And now that is available for a standard offering for commercial applications. Okay, the next one. So other thing we want to bring home is instead of just calling Jim or I or one of our distributors globally, we want to find out, number one is what is the application? So if it's lifting or pulling, safety factors change. So just a reminder, anything that's above 0 degrees is considered lifting. So a way of thinking about it is if you move the load and then something cuts the chain or the wire rope, is that load going to move? Well, if the answer is yes, then it's a lifting application. That has to adhere to the 5-to-1 safety factor. But some of the other questions we're definitely going to be asking is, what kind of power source do you want? We build all 3 different types. So, what's going to be the best for that application? What is the capacity requirement? What's the speed? Is sensitive speed control required or simple on off? What's the working length of that rope or chain? Sometimes people think I'll just get that long of a chain. No, it depends on the number of strands on the hoist. What kind of controls do you want? Pull chain, you want a pennant control, you want full flow, wireless, radio remote, any other options, and duty cycle. And then last but not least is the, what's the environment and working conditions. So again, shipyard, especially offshore, you get some very harsh conditions, and that's where Ingersoll Rand thrives. So things to consider. So we've gone through the highlights on mostly the hoist on this. There's a lot of other applications that we handle, and here's a couple other sources. So if you go to ingersollrand.com, you can navigate, click on the material handling, lifting. We have many custom lifting application solutions, some white sheets, white papers on there, case studies. If you go to the Marine News magazine, last year, there's a major article specifically on shipyards. So there's the link there. All of this will be sent to all the attendees after this presentation. So don't worry about writing it down. You'll have it. Again, there are some of the shipyard white papers that we have. And I also want to make a note here is the U.S. Coast Guard just put this alert out in July of, basically last month. So somebody died because the wire rope connectors were not crimped properly. So make sure you're talking to your customers. This is a Coast Guard safety alert. And somebody died because of it, because it let loose. So just, again, we're always thinking about safety, and sometimes people aren't even thinking about that part of it. And with that, I will turn it back over to Miss Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Mark and Jim. That was a great presentation. I'm going to go ahead and open it up now for Q&A. So it looks like we may have some questions coming in. So remember, you can always put this either in the chat box that you see down below, or there's also a Q&A feature as well. So I'll let those start to come in.
Yep, at the bottom of your screen, if you go down and it'll pop up, you'll see Q&A. Just click that, type in your questions, if any.
Either we did a good job or we put them to sleep, Mark.
I was going to say, it's a quiet group.
Maybe the latter.
Okay, well, as you're considering your questions, just a reminder, so Mark mentioned the other resources. We're also recording this webinar, and we will send it out to you all via email. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel next week or so. We'll send that out. So if you have, wanted a little more information or weren't quite able to, catch what we were saying at any given point, we have this recorded and we'll post it on our YouTube channel for you to reference as you see fit. All right, we had a question come in, and the question is, why are at shipyards the air solutions more popular than the electric solutions?
Yeah, Alex, you weren't listening, I guess, or I didn't do a good job explaining it. But by and large, air is much more forgiving in terms of well, number one, like shock loading, mobility. You don't have to. You just basically just hook it into an air receptacle, another air hose. Whereas electric, you got to have an electrician to come wire it. For the control is variable speed just by its very nature. Whereas electric, to get variable speed, you have to have a VFD, which get quite expensive, especially when larger horsepower, higher capacity hoist. So yeah, it's just more convenience. Again, mobility, flexibility, and the electrics you see more for a fixed application, more consistent type. So overhead bridge cranes in a maintenance shop, you see them on jib cranes, where they stay there all the time, wired in. So that's kind of the overall reason.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Jim, all of that is absolutely correct. But as you see our background pictures over here, you're down and around water. So I don't want to be using electrical anything when I'm near the water. So this shows a dry dock, but again, if you're anywhere around the water, the pneumatic and hydraulic is much more safe than electrical use.
Yep, good point.
Okay. Just again, are able to use the Q&A or the chat feature to enter in any of your questions. I'll give everybody just a few seconds here to enter those in. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you again very much for attending. This was a great session, very informative. Thanks to Mark and to Jim for taking us through all that information. Again, we'll post this recording on our YouTube channel, and you all will receive an email with the recording link, as well as we'll post it on our LinkedIn page. So we'll have a post on that. So if you don't get it in your email, or you're able to access it in another spot within LinkedIn. Thank you again for your time today, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.